Daniel, a lifelong resident of Columbus, Ohio, was driving home one chilly fall evening with his 3-year-old son Lucas in the back seat. The sun was setting, casting a strange golden glow over everything. As they drove down an old country road, they passed a small cemetery, tucked away behind some trees. The graveyard was simple, with faded flowers and worn-out plaques, almost hidden in the tall, uncut grass. It looks like a garden, Daniel thought, feeling a shiver run through him. Lucas had been happily singing along to a nursery rhyme when, out of nowhere, he went silent. Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror to see his son staring out the window, eyes wide. "Look at all those people," Lucas said, pointing toward the cemetery. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He looked over but didn't see a single person. The place was deserted. "What people, Lucas?" "All those people over there," Lucas said, sounding completely serious. "There sure are a lot of grandmas." A chill ran down Daniel's spine. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "What are they doing?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Lucas says that they're just standing there, looking down at the grass." Daniel's pulse quickened, and a cold sweat prickled at the back of his neck. He glanced over again. Nothing. There wasn't anyone there. The air inside the car felt thick, heavy. Without saying a word, Daniel pressed harder on the gas, speeding up, eager to get away. Later that night, after they got home, Daniel couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled deep in his gut. Lucas, on the other hand, seemed completely fine, sitting in front of the TV like nothing had happened. Just as Daniel began to relax a bit, Lucas turned to him and said, "You know, they weren't alive," his eyes never leaving the screen. Daniel's stomach dropped. "What do you mean, buddy?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Those people we saw," Lucas replied. "They weren't moving. They were all paused, like they were stuck." Daniel felt a cold chill sweep over him again. He tried to laugh it off, but the feeling of dread stayed with him. That night, as he tucked Lucas into bed, Daniel couldn't help but glance out the window, half expecting to see something, or someone, standing out there in the dark. On August 4th, 1892, the small town of Fall River, Massachusetts, was shaken by one of the most infamous murders in American history. Andrew Bordon and his wife Abby were found brutally murdered in their own home, bludgeoned to death with an axe. While murders weren't uncommon in the late 1800s, the fact that the main suspect was their 32-year-old daughter, Lizzie Bordon, made this case stand out. The crime and the sensational trial that followed grabbed headlines around the world. Though Lizzie was ultimately acquitted, she remains forever linked to the gruesome killings, and so does the house where the murders took place. Today, that house is a bed and breakfast and museum, attracting history buffs and thrill-seekers alike, curious to see if the rumors of the house being haunted are true. When I first started working here, I was more interested in the history. I really didn't care much about the paranormal, says Suzanne St. John, a realtor and tour guide at the Lizzie Bordon house, in an interview. But her views changed after she had a few strange experiences of her own. She heard laughter and playfulness in the middle of the night. Things get moved around, St. John explains. She's had her own brushes with the unexplained, recalling a time she found toys scattered across a room that no one had been in. There was also the time a picture fell over and slid 2 feet across the floor with no obvious cause. And then there's the closet door that once opened by itself, with no one near it. On the eve of the anniversary of Andrew and Abby's murders, St. John and 2 other tour guides experienced something even more unsettling. All 3 of them suddenly felt a sharp stabbing pain in their left eyes, the exact location of Andrew Bordon's fatal injuries. But perhaps the most chilling story comes from another tour guide at the Lizzie Bordon house. During one tour, she asked the group to silence their phones before starting. Moments later, a guest's phone rang. The guest looked at her phone and said, "It's my mom." The tour guide asked if she wanted to step outside to take the call, but the woman replied, "She died 2 years ago." Considered one of the most haunted restaurants in America, Cole's Public House in Ashland, Massachusetts doesn't just have a ghost problem, it has a ghost problem. Janet Morazzini, a longtime Ashland resident and the bartender-manager of Cole's Public House, shares some chilling stories. The restaurant, built by John Cole in 1832, has a long history, and even before Morazzini started working there, she'd heard about the ghost of a young boy wandering the halls. The building once served as a makeshift hospital during the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. That's where they would quarantine all the sick people. Apparently, quite a few souls passed away there because of it. But the flu pandemic isn't the only source of restless spirits at Cole's Public House. A tragic accident took place nearby. A young girl was struck and killed by a train while playing near the railroad tracks that border the property. Morosini recalls a particularly eerie story from a father and son who visited the restaurant. They stepped outside to watch the trains, and when they returned, she overheard the father trying to reassure his young son. The boy had insisted he saw a little girl sitting beside them while they watched the trains. He's like, "She was sitting right next to me. She was crying. You didn't see the little girl?" And the dad said, "There was nobody there. It was just me and you, buddy," Morosini remembered. There are also stories of other ghosts haunting the restaurant, including the original owner, John Cole. Though he didn't die at the restaurant, some believe he's still watching over the place. One night, when Morosini was alone at the inn, she heard footsteps on the second floor above her, even though she was the only one in the building. Despite the creepy experiences, Morosini doesn't think the spirits mean any harm. Joe shared a chilling story about an unsettling experience he had while helping his brother move into a new house. While carrying some items into a bedroom, Joe says he suddenly heard whispering. It sounded like a heated argument, two people whispering, and it seemed like the voices were coming from the ceiling, Joe explained. Feeling uneasy, Joe ran out of the room and asked his brother if he'd sensed something strange about the house too. His brother admitted the place had a weird vibe, but assured Joe everything would be fine, as long as you're good. Joe told his brother, "I'm not good, but I'm going to help you. Then I'm heading home and probably won't come back here." Sure enough, after Joe left, his brother began experiencing some strange occurrences in the house. But the most terrifying moment came when Joe's young niece was found wandering alone on a busy road, with her hand raised in the air as if she was holding someone's hand. The police were called to investigate the incident. When asked what happened, Joe's 4-year-old niece innocently explained that she had gone for a walk with the old lady that lives here. "She just wanted to go for a walk, so we went for a walk," the little girl said. The family was baffled. The front door was too heavy for a 4-year-old to open on her own, and no one could figure out how she managed to leave the house. But the child insisted. The old lady opened the door. "We petted the dog for a bit, and then we went for a walk." Whoa. She was so genuine, so honest at 4 years old that her dad couldn't call her a liar. Not long after that incident, Joe's brother packed up and moved out, never to return to that house again. Massachusetts may be best known for its infamous witch trials, but its 400-year history is full of other chilling tales. One such story is the murder of Captain Joseph White, a wealthy merchant who was found brutally bludgeoned to death in his own bed. The crime, driven by greed, was allegedly plotted by two brothers, Joseph and Francis Knapp, who hoped to get their hands on Captain White's fortune. Giovanni Alabiso, owner and tour guide at Salem Historical Tours, explains that the brothers enlisted the help of Richard Dick Crowninshield to carry out the plan. Late at night, when Captain White was asleep, Crowninshield sneaked into the house, went upstairs to the second floor, and took a club to the captain's head, crushing his skull. The murder led to a scandalous trial that shocked the public, and is said to have inspired Edgar Allan Poe's famous story, The Telltale Heart, as well as the board game Clue. Whether it's because of the crime's brutal nature or revenge for the attempted theft of his fortune, many believe that the spirit of Captain Joseph White still haunts his former home. People believe Captain White is roaming around that house, protecting whatever treasure he reportedly has. Tourists who visit the Gardner Pingree house, where the murder occurred, often take photos of the empty home. Yet, many of these pictures reveal shadowy figures, both male and female, appearing in the windows and on the landing. Who are they? No one knows for sure. But one thing is certain, according to Alabiso, it's definitely, absolutely active. San Diego's Whaley House is often referred to as America's most haunted house. And with its long history of eerie occurrences, Victor Santana, the operations manager at the Whaley House Museum, has witnessed plenty of people claiming they've heard strange noises, smelled odd scents, and even seen apparitions. Built in 1856 by Thomas Whaley, a former New Yorker who moved west during the gold rush, the house sits on a site with a dark history. Before Whaley purchased the land, it was home to San Diego's gallows, where many criminals were executed. One prisoner in particular stands out, Yankee Jim Robinson, who was hanged there after stealing a boat. According to legend, Thomas Whaley himself witnessed Robinson's execution. In the years that followed, Whaley reported strange happenings in his home. He often heard heavy footsteps on the stairs and claimed to hear a man grunting. After Whaley's own death from natural causes, he's said to have joined the house's other supposed spirits, with some visitors claiming to smell his cigar smoke or even see him standing at the top of the stairs, watching them. Other mysterious events include the scent of lavender, thought to be the perfume of Whaley's wife, and the presence of what some believe are the ghosts of the family's pets. visitors have reported feeling something brushing against their legs, or even being licked by what they think might be the family dog. Though Santana has never seen a ghost himself, he's had a few odd experiences. On one occasion, he saw a doll seemingly move on its own, and he's heard the faint sound of a woman crying late at night. Santana also witnessed a paranormal investigation at the Whaley House using an EVP recorder, an electronic device used to capture voices believed to be from spirits. During one session, an investigator asked, "Are you happy we're here with you tonight?" When the recording was played back, a voice could be heard responding chillingly, "No." Elena from Oklahoma shared a story about an imaginary friend she had as a child. While her memories have faded over the years, she still vividly recalls visiting her grandparents, Granny Junie and Pa Hank, who lived in a small house with a quiet backyard. "I have such fond memories of my Pa Hank. He would sit under the tree with me and tell me stories about his life, and even memories of the Prohibition era. He was actually a really interesting character." But here's the catch. Her grandfather passed away in 1981 and Elena was born in 1982. "I don't think I ever realized that I was getting stories from a ghost." The rest of my family knew about his presence in the house, though. My Granny Junie would never stay in the house on the anniversary of his death, as my grandfather died in that house. Elena also remembers hearing Pa Hank getting up in the middle of the night during her visits. It never occurred to me that these were memories of an entity. Looking back, Elena realizing that her childhood imaginary friend was actually her late grandfather sheds new light on those experiences. But because it was a relative and not a stranger, it didn't feel eerie or unnatural. "It never felt like I was talking to a ghost," she also says. "It just felt like I was talking to my Pa Hank." The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, has stood for over a century, originally built as a luxurious mountain retreat for the wealthy. But over the years, as occupancy dwindled, the Grand Hotel began to fall into disrepair. By the 1970s, it was a shadow of its former self, until famed author Stephen King stayed there for a night, an experience that inspired his iconic horror novel, The Shining. The success of both the book and the blockbuster film that followed helped revive the Stanley Hotel's reputation, drawing guests from all over, eager to visit the place that inspired one of the scariest horror stories of all time. And with the hotel's long history, it's no surprise that many visitors have reported strange, possibly supernatural occurrences. One such visitor was Henry Yao, a Texas resident, who, intrigued by the ghostly rumors, booked a last-minute trip to the Stanley in April 2016 to see for himself. After dinner, Yao took a walk around the hotel, snapping photos along the way. Stopping at the grand staircase, he waited for everyone to clear out before taking a picture. At the time, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but later that night Yao began feeling incredibly sick. "I felt really ill. I had the shivers. Something just felt really off," he told to his companion. His companion even suggested going to the emergency room, but Yao decided to tough it out. The next day on his way home, Yao began scrolling through the photos on his phone. That's when he saw something unsettling, a figure standing on the staircase in one of the pictures. The only problem? No one had been there when he took it. Curious and a bit spooked, Yao posted the photo on Instagram, half joking that he'd captured a ghost. The post quickly went viral, attracting attention from paranormal enthusiasts and media outlets worldwide. Some experts even claimed there were two ghosts in the image, while others theorized that Yao's sudden illness was caused by the ghost trying to materialize, drawing energy from him in the process. As for what Yao believes, he laughs it off, saying, "I have no idea." In the winter of 1998, the Thompson family embarked on a trip that would forever change their lives. The journey was to take them deep into the remote countryside, to the isolated home of George Thompson, their patriarch. Grandpa George had lived alone for years in a sprawling old farmhouse surrounded by dense woods, a place where time seemed to have stopped. The snow-covered trees stood like silent sentinels, and the world outside seemed frozen in time. Mark Thompson, his wife Emily, and their two children, Alex and Sarah, were packed into their old station wagon, winding through treacherous mountain roads. The trip was long, the sky a constant shade of gray, and the snow fell relentlessly as they made their way through the desolate landscape. They had barely spoken in the car since they left their suburban home at dawn. Mark, gripping the steering wheel tightly, was deep in thought. Emily stared out the window, watching the trees blur by, her face expressionless. The kids, though excited at first, had grown quiet as the journey stretched on, and the world outside became darker, colder, more menacing. "How much longer, Dad?" Alex, their teenage son, asked from the back seat. "I am hungry." "Not much longer," Mark replied. though he wasn't entirely sure. He hadn't been to his father's house in years. He'd almost forgotten the way, but something in him felt a strange pull toward the old place. A sense of unease had gripped him ever since his father had called a few days ago, his voice rasping over the phone, asking them to visit. There had been something off in his tone, something desperate. Emily shifted in her seat, glancing at her husband. "Do you think your dad is okay?" she asked quietly. He sounded different. Mark shrugged, trying to shake off the gnawing anxiety. "He's old. Maybe he's just lonely. It's been a tough few years since Mom passed." The kids, sensing their parents' tension, remained silent. Sarah, their younger daughter, clutched her stuffed rabbit, her wide eyes staring at the swirling snow outside. Hours passed and the road grew narrower, more isolated. The snow deepened, and soon they found themselves driving through a thick forest, the tall pines towering on either side. The sky was darkening, the snowflakes heavier, thicker. It was getting harder to see the road ahead. "We are almost there," Mark said, more to himself than anyone else. But as he drove, something gnawed at him. The woods felt too quiet, too still, as if they were driving into something ancient and forgotten. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the old farmhouse appeared at the end of the road. The house stood ominously against the backdrop of the darkening sky, its roof sagging under the weight of the snow, the windows black like empty eyes. It hadn't changed much since Mark had last seen it, though it looked more worn, more decayed, as if time had taken its toll. They parked the car, and as soon as they stepped outside, the cold hit them like a punch. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow crunched beneath their boots as they trudged toward the house. Mark knocked on the door, but there was no answer. He knocked again, harder this time, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. There stood Grandpa George, a gaunt figure in the doorway. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were sunken into dark hollows. He smiled, but it was strained, and something about the way he stood there, staring at them without moving, made Emily uneasy. "Come in," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "You must be freezing." They stepped into the dimly lit house, the warmth of the fire in the hearth doing little to chase away the chill that seemed to cling to the air. The house smelled of damp wood and decay, and the walls were covered in old, faded photographs of the family. Mark glanced around, memories flooding back, but something felt wrong. The house was the same, yet different. It felt colder, darker, like it was holding on to something unseen. Grandpa George led them to the living room, where a fire crackled weakly in the fireplace. The flickering light cast strange shadows on the walls, and the kids huddled together on the couch, feeling the weight of the house pressing in on them. "How have you been, Dad?" Mark asked, trying to break the tension. George didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat down in his old armchair, his eyes fixed on the fire. "Things have been strange," he said finally. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in days. "Since your mother passed, this house, it hasn't been the same." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, her brow furrowing. George turned his hollow gaze toward them, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "There's something in this house. Something old. Something evil." He paused, his voice trembling. "I have been hearing things, seeing things. I think it wants me to leave, but I can't. I've been here too long. It won't let me go." Mark exchanged a worried glance with Emily. His father had always been eccentric, but this was different. This was madness. "You're just tired, Dad," Mark said, trying to reassure him. "The winter's hard on everyone." But George shook his head violently. "No, you don't understand. This house is alive. It knows you are here now. It knows." The room fell silent, the crackling fire the only sound. The kids stared wide-eyed at their grandfather, fear creeping into their hearts. That night, the family settled into their rooms, the unease hanging thick in the air. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the snow fell heavier. Mark couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. His father's words kept echoing in his head. Something about the house felt wrong. He could feel it, a presence lurking in the shadows, watching them. Around midnight, the strange noises started. At first, it was just a faint creaking, like the old house settling under the weight of the snow. But then it grew louder, more distinct footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the halls. Mark sat up in bed, his heart pounding. He strained to listen. The footsteps were getting closer, heading toward their room. He reached over and shook Emily awake. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Emily blinked, her eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" Before Mark could answer, the door to their bedroom creaked open. They both froze, staring at the dark figure standing in the doorway. It was Grandpa George, but there was something wrong with him. His eyes were wide and vacant, and his face was twisted in an expression of terror. He stood there unmoving, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "Dad?" Mark whispered, but George didn't respond. Instead, he took a step into the room, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Get out," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "It's coming. You need to leave this house. Now." Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness. Emily screamed, and Mark leapt out of bed, fumbling for the flashlight on the nightstand. He clicked it on, but the beam of light only illuminated the empty doorway. George was gone. Panic surged through Mark as he grabbed Emily's hand and rushed to the kids' room. They found Alex and Sarah huddled together, terrified. "Get dressed," Mark ordered. "We're leaving." As they hurriedly gathered their things, strange whispers echoed through the house, low and guttural, like voices speaking in an ancient language. The walls seemed to close in around them, and the temperature dropped sharply, their breath visible in the freezing air. They raced downstairs, but when they reached the front door, it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself was holding them inside. The windows were covered in frost, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and writhe. "Dad, what's happening?" Alex cried. Mark didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that they had to get out. Then, from the darkness, they heard a soft, melodic voice, one they recognized. It was the voice of Mark's mother, though she had been dead for years. It called to them, beckoning, but it was wrong, twisted, filled with malice. "Come to me," it whispered. "Come to me." The family huddled together, terror gripping them. They were trapped, with no way out, and the house, whatever it was alive, feeding off their fear, drawing them deeper into its dark, malevolent embrace. And then, as if it had been waiting for them all along, the house began to move, to shift, its walls groaning and creaking. Something ancient, something evil had awakened, and it wasn't going to let them go. I had taken this story from a website which claims this is true story. Back in the 90s, Marty was a huge fan of ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and his famous dummy, Charlie McCarthy. She shared her story, describing how her love for ventriloquism led to an unsettling experience. One day, Marty's father stumbled upon a ventriloquist doll while browsing a small magic shop near Santa Rosa, California. Thinking it would make the perfect birthday gift for his daughter, he bought it. But something strange happened at checkout. According to Marty, the cashier gave her dad weird vibes and said something cryptic. "You know, when you put your hand inside the doll, he's going to come alive." Her father brushed it off as a joke and brought the doll home. Marty was thrilled when she got the dummy, recalling, "I was so happy. I was obsessed with that doll." Whoa. But not long after, things took a creepy turn. Marty noticed something strange. The doll's expression would change, even though its face was made of hard plastic, making that impossible. She swore its smile would shift. To protect the dummy she loved so much, Marty's family started locking it away in a cupboard at night. But then, one night, they were all woken up by the sound of footsteps in the living room. Assuming it was the dog or another family member, they went to check. No one was there, except for the doll sitting on the couch. We were always careful about it because I loved that doll so much. Things only got strange. One time, while Marty and her dad were away, her uncle was alone in the house. He said he heard Marty's dad calling his name from the living room, except her dad wasn't home. When he went to check, he found the doll sitting on the couch, just like before. "Our whole family was freaked out by the doll," Marty explained. "People started hearing their names being called, and we'd hear footsteps at night. Eventually, we decided it was time to get rid of it." Marty's parents, being Mexican and religious, suspected the doll might be demonic. They decided to burn it, but when they put it on the grill, it wouldn't burn. "The doll wouldn't catch fire no matter what," Marty said. Next, they tried cutting it with a knife, but that didn't work either. Finally, they threw it in the trash, hoping to be done with it. But when Marty's dad went to retrieve the trash bin after collection, the doll was somehow still inside. Desperate to rid themselves of it, they buried the doll in the backyard and filled the hole with cement. Marty and her family have since moved away from that house, but she admits they still think about that doll and wonder, what if it eventually finds one of us? Please give your opinion in the comment box about the stories.